Thank you for that introduction, Scott. For now, I'll leave my affiliation as Temple, since most of the work was done there. Today, I'm going to be talking about instruction techniques to help ESL learners understand the Miranda rights. But I want you to keep in mind that the same techniques that I'm talking about can be used for other legal issues that need to be discussed with these types of learners. I want to very quickly credit my co-collaborators, Christina Talavella, Sherry Michaelovich, and Annetta Pavlenko, who was speaking earlier today. And the ideas I'm going to present today are based on research, our own collective teaching experience, and many long conversations about what we thought would work and what wouldn't work. So I want to start just by saying thank you all for still being here at 3 o'clock. And I am grateful that I'm at the end of this particular forum, because it seems appropriate that we're going to talk about the learners themselves at this point and how we can help them. So first, I want to talk about the areas that ESL students struggle with that relate to understanding the Miranda warnings. The first area was covered very thoroughly earlier with legal jargon and with homophones and polysemy. But there's also other issues, like the complex sentence structure. And particularly, even though the Miranda rights are generally only 5 to 6 lines, they still have multi-phrase sentences, the conditional tenses, and the passive tense in the language. And also there's cultural context issues. So if a student wasn't raised in the United States, they may not know anything about the Bill of Rights, or the arrest and interrogation procedures, or trial procedures. And if they don't already know this information, even if they do understand the language in the Miranda rights, they don't understand how it fits in, or the context, and their ability to understand it is considerably less. So this presentation is actually going to take the form of a very long lesson plan. And what I'm hoping is that those of you who work with second language learners will be able to pull parts of it that will work specifically for your students and will help them. By the way, how many second language teachers are actually in the room right now? Just a couple of you? Okay, all right. I'll try to also keep some other things in there too. Trainers and teachers, there we go. Okay, good. All right, so most of the ideas I have are based on content-based learning, and that's because that way you can have your learning content with your language skills. And sometimes ESL instructors get concerned about they're going to not be able to teach grammar if they take the time to do this, and what I'm going to show today is that you can combine them. There's no reason not to. And I would also like to refer all of you to an amazing website that one of my collaborators created that's teaching legal topics to non-native speakers of English. And it has a lot of ideas on it that I'm not going to be able to present today, so I hope that all of you will do it. I actually have a handout here with the webpage on it too that I'll give to everyone. So, like all good lesson plans, I'm going to begin with the objectives. So the objectives for this lesson would be to introduce the students to the concept of a legal right, to teach the students the vocabulary, grammar, and context necessary to understand the Miranda warnings, to compare the U.S. legal system to their own country's legal system, which has been shown to deepen the understanding in anything that you're teaching, to discuss how the U.S. court system works, which will of course show the importance of the Miranda rights, and to practice the legal language with communicative methods. So, first, I'd like to start the lesson with discussing the concept of a legal right. So I would begin by asking students, what is a right? And you can expect all those answers that we've been talking about earlier. They may tell you it's the opposite of left. They may tell you it's correct. And go ahead and collect all of those answers. And then once you have it, you have the material to talk about. Well, see, there are words in any language that have more than one meaning. And today we're going to talk about a different meaning. And that is a human right or a legal right. And sometimes as teachers, we struggle to come up with those definitions we want to use. So I'd like to refer you to the Plain English Legal Dictionary. And this was actually developed for the Australia legal system. But a lot of the concepts are the same and the definitions are simple English, as you can see. So this one talks about a right being a law, and it talks about how it protects a person from other people or government organizations. So they get the idea in a language they can understand. Now, as lawyers, you may cringe at this particular definition because it doesn't have that exact language, but for a language learner, it's a lot easier for them to understand. Now, then you can start a conversation about what rights do you have. And at this point, I'm not looking for right or wrong answers. And it might just be a discussion where it gets the idea. And it might be a place where you could actually start writing, okay, US rights over here, other countries over here, and just start writing them on the board. The next thing I'd like to show you is a vocabulary exercise that was created by Tavella. And there's 3 columns, but we're only focusing on the first one right now. I will get to the other 2 momentarily. So the first one, you just come up with a list of vocabulary words that they're going to need to cover the topic you're talking about on that day. And they rate them 1 to 3. So 1 is, I have no idea what this word means. 2 is, I think I know what the word means. And 3 is, I could explain it to someone else. And as a teacher, this is convenient because as they're filling it out, you can walk around and get a feel for where your students are and know how detailed your discussion is going to need to be. So next is teaching the vocabulary. Pictures are great for this. So the top one in the corner under free speech is a little hard to see, so I'll explain that one. It's a woman holding a megaphone, and she's explaining. And you can talk to your students about, well, why is she doing this? What do you think she's talking about? And the idea of free speech will come across as you're discussing it. And you can talk about why that's a right. Why does somebody need legal protection to do this? Then you can move through all the others. And then once they've gotten the basic idea of each of them, we need to reinforce it. So you might separate the pictures from the words, give them a chance to either as a group or individually try to match them back together. You could also use the pictures of the words as flashcards, depending on the level of your students. We either show them the picture and they point to the word, or show them the word and they point to the picture, whichever way is more convenient for their level. Another option might be to kind of do a matching the definition. And again, the reason I wanted to show this to all of you, because most of you would know how to do a matching the definition exercise, is I wanted you to see the language and the simplification of it. So the first one is, when a person may no longer leave the police station, they are under, of course it's B, police custody. But it explains it in a way the second language learner could understand it. Okay. So next, introduce some of the basic rights for the United States at a level of understand. So these are some of the ones taken from the Bill of Rights, simplified again. Okay, so you can start talking about the right of free speech. And if the students are at a lower level, you can go back to that picture and show them and talk about it again. If they're a little higher level, you might be able to break them into groups. They could each discuss it and then explain back to the other group what it means. Or if they're at a very advanced level, you could have them write about one. So you can adjust all of the activities I'm going to talk about today for their level. Okay. And if they're also students that might be studying language and law or studying to be future lawyers, you can talk about things like cruel and unusual punishment or search and seizure, or even give them the Bill of Rights and have them go through it. So next, we're moving to those other 2 columns. And at this point, you're hoping that your students have a pretty good grasp of the concepts, and you want them to deepen their understanding and check their understanding. So first, you just give them a statement, and they respond yes or no. So rights are things that you are entitled to or allowed to have by law, and they mark yes or no. Then you go through the answers, make sure they understood, and next move to deepen your understanding. And this is where you're asking the students to do a little more critical thinking, or you're asking the students to kind of bring up the knowledge that they already have. So things like list 3 rights you have in your country, which would get them to apply what they're learning. Describe a situation that's not legal, so they're thinking about the word and how it applies. Next is that comparison between the 2 countries, the United States and wherever they're from. And a nice way to do this is a Venn diagram. And again, depending on your level of your students, you can adjust this. And depending on the group of your students. If they are mostly all from the same country, you can put them in groups and have them brainstorm the ideas together. If they're from many different countries, you can have them work on it individually with your help, and then compare the ideas once they've finished. Another option also is to give them lists of words and they put them in where they go. And that way they can think about it if they're lower level and don't know the vocabulary. So the idea of this is not just to have them do the comparison, but also to lead to some discussion, so they have an opportunity to talk about the topic as well. Okay, adding context. I have a long list here, and I'm going to go through them fairly quickly. They are just to give you some ideas and have it adjust to the student's level. So first, watch a video. And there's a surprisingly amount of clips out there that you can find that show somebody being given the Miranda Warnings. You can find them off TV shows. One of my favorites is Law & Order, Blue Bloods, or The Wire. But you can find lots of options where this is happening. And you can see how they're given well and how they're given poorly and talk about them. Another one of my favorites is the Smart Songs. And this is for a little bit lower level students, but it repeats the things they need to know over and over. And after you play it twice, it will be stuck in your head all day. And hopefully your students as well. So they'll remember. It'll help with that repetition. And if they're very advanced, you can show some documentaries. So one I found that was interesting is with the Annenberg classrooms. And this actually goes into the history of Miranda, some of the issues with it, and a little bit about the Innocence Project. Next, you can do readings. The readings can be current news articles, literature about the Miranda Warnings, and again, the Innocent Project. This particular one is Angel Gonzalez, and it was a case where he was not given the Miranda rights properly and then given a coercive interrogation technique. They had the case overturned. So it gives some examples. You can also look up some current court cases that involve second language learners. There are plenty of them out there. Next, bring in a guest speaker. And one of the great advantages of a guest speaker is that they can talk about legal issues with your students at a level you may not be able to because you're not a lawyer, and you definitely don't want to give your students bad advice. So you can bring in somebody who's a legal aid representative or a police officer, and they can have a discussion with them, not just about Miranda, but any other issues that they have, and answer their questions. One thing to be careful about is make sure that the learners are comfortable with the person who's coming to speak to them. You don't want to bring a police officer into a group of undocumented immigrants. You'll make them very, very uncomfortable. So be careful with who the speaker is. Okay, so now more specifically with the Miranda Warnings. One of the things that I've really enjoyed doing in the data collection I've had is playing the audio for them first, because really, if they happen to be in a situation where they hear this, this is how it's going to happen. They're probably not going to have it presented to them in words first, so they can hear the audio first. So ask them, what did you just hear? What did you understand? Can you tell me what it said? Then they're prepped and ready for more information. The next parts I'm going to go through very quickly, and then I'll go back through each of them individually. So present the words written out, then move to the difficult vocabulary, discuss the meaning of each clause, discuss the grammar, and last, discuss the important points holistically. So let's start with the Miranda Warnings themselves. And one of the things I like to point out, particularly to any of you who are grammar nerds, the Miranda Warnings have 6 infinitive clauses, 6 prepositional phrases, 6 subordinate clauses, and 12 independent clauses. They're presented in about 35 seconds. So that's a lot for anybody to absorb because it's very complex language. The next thing I want to point out are some of the vocabulary words, and I'll do this fairly quickly because we've already talked about it once today. So we have the word right 5 times, and not in the context that your students probably know it as. We have the word question 3 times, and in a different way each time. The first time it's part of the passive voice, the next time it's a gerund, and the third time it's a noun. The third time is the one that they're likely to understand, but they've already misunderstood it twice, so they're probably not going to recognize it when they hear it. The other ones are just words that are difficult for them because they don't know them, or they know them in a different context. Present, Annetta talked about, and the same with appointed. So, one thing that you should keep in mind is the Miranda rights do vary from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. So you want to find the Miranda rights for the jurisdiction that you are in. So talk to the local police station and get a copy before you review it. Now, breaking down the meaning. This was an interesting idea, not specifically for Miranda, but by Fillmore and Fillmore when they were discussing how to break down complex phrases. And what they did is they broke it down phrase by phrase, and I'm going to show you an example with the Miranda rights, obviously. So I picked the most complex phrase, and you just start with vocabulary. So if you cannot afford, what does afford mean? So we make sure they understand that. Then you can move on to context. Afford what? And I realize that's answered in the next phrase, but you can see what they already know. Then you can take it beyond what the Miranda rights actually say. What happens if you can't? What happens then? Okay. So next, we have what is a lawyer? Okay, the lawyer and hire are the 2 words they may not know in there. Then you can move on to why would you need to hire a lawyer? We can discuss what a lawyer does, what's the purpose of a lawyer, and this will give them context they may not know. And last is what does a lawyer do during a questioning or during a trial, and make sure they understand those things. I'm not going to go through all of these, obviously, that would take too long, but here's what the rest of them look like. And again, it's on the handout I can give you at the end. Now, let's talk about grammar. Okay, so some of the grammar things you can do, as I mentioned, there's many different types of clauses. So if you're working with more advanced students that are studying clause types, the Miranda rights are a great way to look at them and identify them. So you can have them go through and pick out the dependent clauses, pick out the infinitive clauses, pick out the prepositional phrases, and it'll help them review those phrases, what they are, and might help them in understanding. You could also cover some other grammar conventions. So you can look at the conditional tense or modal verbs. You can look at passive voice. All of these are present. This is one of the advantages of this being so complex in language terms. So lastly, we want to review all of the Miranda rights and make sure they understood. So discuss the meaning and the important points. So start with, what do you remember? Then you can move to phrase by phrase, line by line. What did that line say? What did that mean? Make sure they understand. What are the most important points? And this is where we're doing a little bit of critical thinking, and you want to make sure that they actually can identify these, which is the point of the Miranda lesson. So, one would be, I do not have to talk to the police. Make sure they understand that part. I can have a lawyer before answering any questions. And the third would be, if I can't afford a lawyer, the court will give me one for free. Said simply so they can understand it. Next is just a practice. We can create scenarios where the rights would be given and have them acted out. And this not only gives them the option of practicing reading it, giving them the reading, but also how to respond. Because one of the problems that we've been discussing today is that how to invoke those rights. And particularly if they're from a culture that is not used to direct speech patterns, they're going to say something like, well, I think I might need a lawyer. That's not going to get them a lawyer. Okay, they need to practice saying unequivocally, I want a lawyer now. Okay, and that kind of thing will help them practice that. Next, let's talk about what happens after an arrest. Because if they don't understand the part about the trial, then the whole point of the Miranda warnings isn't clear. So you can move into what's an arraignment, where they're doing their plea. How do they set bail? What's bail? And what happens at the trial? Now, these are again content-based ideas. One of my collaborators uses 12 Angry Men to talk about trials and to talk about jury. So it gives them reading practice as well. And she finds that it works really well with them, and one of the reasons is because they really enjoy the reading out loud part. There's a lot of places where they're allowed to get angry and they're allowed to use paralinguistic features, and it's just a lot of fun for them in addition to being something that they learn a lot from. So they have practice reading skills, introducing vocabulary. She provides vocabulary with each chapter before they read it. Then they go through. It introduces the students to how the trial works and the effects personality has on that process, which is an interesting thing for them to think about. She also does things like she brings in a jury summons and shows them what it looks like. It explains how juries are selected, which is something they probably wouldn't know about. She also found blog posts from people who are writing about their jury experience, so they have a more modern view since 12 Angry Men is from 1957. Okay. Another option is to hold a mock trial. Have them act it out themselves and play out the parts and see what the roles are like. And for those who are working with a younger audience, another one of the collaborators has had a lot of luck using Monster, which is also a play, and it is about a 16-year-old boy on trial for murder. So middle school or high school might really relate to this. Another interesting option that we've tried is arranging a visit to the trial. And courts are very helpful in doing this. The staff will often assist in helping you find an interesting trial to take the students to. So it's something that will be interesting for them to watch. They'll send orientation materials in advance so that the students can be prepared for what they're going to experience and explain the security procedures, which can be quite detailed. It may lead to some very interesting discussions. They can talk about the trial. Do they think justice was served? What happened? What do they think? They can talk about the procedures and how they worked. They can also look at security issues. And one interesting thing that happened to one of my collaborators is that she took a Muslim woman in a garb with her face covered to a trial. They wouldn't let her in the room because her face was covered. So they came up with a very interesting solution of letting her go in first with her face uncovered so that her male counterparts could not see her. Then she could walk in, sit in the front row. They came in behind her, and it solved the problem. The men left first, she came after them, and everything was solved. So it might lead to some very interesting discussions and solutions about how to handle some of these issues. And of course, it's going to reinforce the concepts, they'll hear authentic language, and it'll give them an experiential learning environment. Okay? And they'll be able to participate rather than just reading about it. Now, The last thing I'm going to mention today is just a word of caution. And that is that you really need to be careful not to give your students legal advice, because if you do, it could have serious consequences for them if they're wrong, and potentially they could sue you for giving them the bad advice. So be very careful, and refer them to someone who can help, or bring in a speaker, as I mentioned before. Okay, so that's actually all I have, so thank you for your attention, particularly at this hour of the afternoon. And if you have any questions I can address, please let me know. That's the website that I'm referring to. Please take a look at it. And as I mentioned, I have some handouts that I will send around, actually. Thank you.